Welcome, one and all. This is the Peace Dealer, and welcome to the Saturn webinar, which we will not only learn all about Saturn and welcome, but also gain and uncover the profound mysteries that really go heavily into the Lord of Karma. As when you think about Saturn, you really want to think about karma and the responsibility that comes with the actions you have to take, especially now that Saturn's about to shift. We're gonna move forward with these decisions. Saturn gets a bad rap, I would say, about a whole lot. But then again, Saturn kind of doesn't really make it easy for people to like it. But Saturn necessarily isn't really about popularity as much as it is power and dominance. As such, once again, when it comes to an archetype that Saturn represents super well, you really want to think karma. And a good way to understand karma is to think about how fate and destiny interplay. And similar to the cardinal, fixed, and mutable energies of the zodiac, you have the cardinal, the I want to see if the stable word is destiny, but it really is just like predeterminism. So, not to say there's no free will, but when it comes to fate, you're really thinking of influences that govern what's meant to happen in this life. And if anything, some of you were fated to watch this webinar. And so it's something that you can't really escape because, you know, when it comes to fate, which in a lot of ways is ruled by Jupiter, you've made the decision to really come here. So there's certain things that might have led to you buying this webinar ticket or even being aware of my channel. And the experience of that fate is destiny. This is going to be how you perceive a lot of what really leads up to you having your fate. So where karma comes in is the individual decisions that you make with your free will create karma for you. Some people say dharma, right? But you know, karma is usually seen as, sometimes you can look at karma as points you have, which of course Saturn would organize, but karma is really more the consequences of your actions. So when people deal with past life karma, which Saturn also rules, it's really talking about dealing with the consequences of actions you might have done from a past life in the form of, you know, certain connections feeling a certain way. And Saturn, as the Lord of Karma, is the one who enforces the law on whatever consequences come about from your actions. And as such, you really want to take some time to personally think about what actions have you taken, the actions that you've taken over the past 3 years. If they were to come back towards you, where would you stand? These are things to think about as Saturn moves into Capricorn, and we really gain a powerful sense of our karma as we make very important decisions. When you think of decision making, it is very Saturnian, and it's definitely something that makes or breaks those who truly succeed and those who are just kind of there mediocre. Um, Regardless, at the very end of this webinar, we are going to do a Saturn initiation for those of you who are ready and willing to commit to something legit that will be the Saturn and Cap transit. I would get a piece of paper or any kind of special writing or pad that you can write on. In this initiation, we are going to write, sign, and seal an agreement with Saturn, the Lord of Karma itself. And if you are ready to really commit to these goals and you signing this agreement, Saturn will definitely work with you to literally accomplish every single thing you are in this agreement. So I'm going to give you some time to maybe get this material. If not, we'll also get some time at the end. But before we really go in to the webinar, you still want to recognize more so and really more so embrace and think about how has your relationship with Saturn been? When it comes to outer planets, since you have a relationship with every planet, the planets aren't necessarily like gods, but you can see them as like deities or just higher beings. And whereas the personal planets incorporate certain facets within you, these outer planets you can develop relationships with. So what is your relationship with Saturn? Really ponder that. As we go in through this webinar, we're going to illuminate how to identify more of what Saturn's influence is and a bit of how to harness it and work with it. So take a couple minutes to think about what Saturn is now, and we'll do so after the webinar, and we'll see if maybe there's anything different. All right. So, with that being said, if we look into the mythology of Saturn, Saturn has been known by the Romans and the Greek as Kronos. There's actually two different applications of Kronos. Um, I think the way the Greeks used Kronos is different than how the Romans perceived Kronos, but they ended up getting syncretized. And I think one thing that's really symbolic is how Kronos is father time, but he also rides around with a sheath. I'm sorry, he also rides around with a scythe, similar to, you know, the god of death, or, like a reaper would. And of course, this ruler of time would indicate one who is present at the end of all cycles, while also keying into the power and influence of agriculture, as Saturn is somewhat known for. I think one of the most interesting facets about Kronos is the horrible or Saturn is the horrible reputation that Saturn or Kronos has been known to have. I mean, he's the son of Uranus, and this mofo literally, in order to gain power, castrates his dad. And then of course he gives birth to Zeus and all the other like major deities. And then he literally, I guess, to protect himself, eats his children. And like his wife had to trick him and make him eat a rock so that Zeus could be saved and, not eaten. And yeah, the rest is history. No, I'm joking. But it's quite interesting, definitely, and how a lot of this energy um kind of has parallels, which we'll talk about. But, you know, there's a bit of a savage mythology with Kronos. And it really does echo and mirror a lot of how we see Saturn, which is just cold, heartless. Kronos, Saturn is not really the one that's going to care about your emotions the way others might, like maybe the moon or Cancer. Um, I really would want you to, I really do want you to acknowledge and keep in mind heavily this theme, because a lot of the mythology has personally evolved with Kronos and Saturn. And even though some accounts aren't really the same, the whole theme of you know Kronos or Saturn being a keeper of time or the father of time really does, continue to express itself. And when we get into the astrological significance, it'll definitely revisit its awareness. As a planet, Saturn is, of course, known as the sixth planet in the solar system and the second largest planet as well. It's known and classified as a gas planet, like Neptune and Uranus and Jupiter. But I think what gives Saturn its popularity is the rings around it. 9 rings, to be exact. And unlike Neptune, that has like 14 moons, Saturn has like 62 that are at least known. And I still can't wrap my mind around having more than one moon. But then again, these planets are way huger. All right. Um, when we now look at the astrological significance of Saturn, we're bringing into account its prominence and popularity, or rather, its understanding as the god of agriculture. Also, Saturn is going to signify ambition. But if you think about the patience needed for crops to grow and the cycles to make sure that, you know, the weather is conducive for good crops, Saturn being the god of agriculture, seen like this, is really more so, you know, to do with, once again, the timing of things, as well as making sure there's great power in what is harvested. But overall, Saturn is going to represent integrity and everything that comes with it. Um, when you want to time things, you're going to look at Saturn because this is what influences the very pulse of everything that is relevant. Well, I would say that's more the sun as far as relevancy and hotness, but the order, the founder of civilization, social order, and conformity, ambition, career, authority, all these things, Saturn rules. But once again, this is more in a sense where, as the taskmaster and the lord of karma, there's a certain standard that you'll have to live up to break out through this energy in the greatest of ways. Depending on the house and sign that Saturn is in, will indicate your level and proficiency of ambition. And what's really amazing about Saturn is that it can even key you in to know the type of career someone will be in because you can measure their ambition. A sense of one's inner authority can also be seen by Saturn. And you really, once again, want to look at this as not only a bringer of karmic lessons, but a source of being able to sense timing of events. So, to kind of expand on this, if we look at the elements of karma, wherever people kind of reach hangups, or they have, you know, issues that they have to resolve, it's usually either a lack of integrity or a lack of authority that will indicate an issue with Saturn. Anytime there's difficulty in one's life in a certain area, there's a call to integrity that has to be met so that such karmic lessons could either be transcended or neutralized. So when we look at the elements of karma, we look in the zodiac chart and examine Saturn in the fire signs or water signs or earth signs or air signs. And when Saturn is in a fire sign, it is the spirit tester. Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Saturn will now, wherever it is, becomes a judge or tester. And in the fire signs, it tests the spirits of yourself and others. Of course, true to integrity, Saturn will test you harder than it tests others. So after it tests you, it uses you to test others. So tests of spirit testers are very harsh, especially in the case of Aries, where they could be very impatient, but it does, with that pressure, bring out very powerful spirits. And the hearts of themselves and others are judged to see how authentic and original people are. Cosmic judges with Saturn's in with Saturn in Gemini, Aquarius, and Libra kind of represent the judges of the mind, where as a cosmic judge, or usually there are mental tests employed, or quality of knowledge is judged very profoundly to really gain a sense of where someone's mind is at or whether they are who they say they are. Things get a little bit more complex with soul karma, as Saturn in water signs like Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio will indicate a sense of deep, complex psychological motivations that must be transcended if they are not impurity. So soul karma will indicate misabuse of certain psychic energy, or the opposite, that must either be maintained or in this lifetime worked through, and vice versa if transmuted. And then, of course, Taskmaster, the traditional set, Saturn in Earth signs, which will indicate Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, very by the book, critical, analyzation, organization, and valuation of what the structure is, can be, and will be set. In these elements, you'll find, in the case of the Taskmaster, the physicality of one's mind and soul and everything is very heavily tested, so that there's a huge prioritization on that which is real and physical. The states of karma are even more important because this gives you greater insight into the nature. The elements are more the flavor of the karma, but this will give you a great understanding of the nature of the karma that you are dealing with. And when it comes to powerful karma, when Saturn is in cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, this is going to entail and highlight an important need to gain great responsibility based off the actions taken. So the karma that is done and the weight of the actions of these people are enormous. And it really teaches them in this lifetime to be very careful about their actions, because it could, if they're not responsible, it could all crash down on them. Fixed karma is a bit more lenient, but it could be very challenging when Scorpio's in Taurus, Scorpio. When Saturn is in Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, or Aquarius, you have fixed karma. So it's really just going to entail having to deal with a fixed amount of karmic lessons. It doesn't necessarily have to be a fixed amount as much as the strength of will that has to be developed through the karmic lessons that won't really go anywhere until they're completed. But people with fixed karma can develop such strength to weather and get through the most difficult of periods. Whereas people with powerful karma can develop super powerful intention and open doors others could only dream of. Then you have magical karma. People with like their Saturn in Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. People with magical karma have to usually deal with delays in life because there's a lot once they're able to master that they can take advantage of such delays. But you know, Saturn in the mutable signs really makes serious and makes others really responsible about their perception. And let me backtrack, because what really adds strength through this fixed karma that those in fixed signs get is the responsibility of the values that they have and what they do with their energy. And once again, intent. So with magical karma, one has to be really responsible about how they perceive what they perceive, because they can manifest it very greatly with Saturn there. So if they don't have any integrity with it, it can mislead others, or it could just really block one considerably. Whereas in a positive sense, this could allow one to really take certain ideas and allow them to become instant in its manifestation. Magical karma is a not the easiest to understand, but it definitely helps you take more serious every single thought, feeling, and belief that you have. One word of caution before we get into the Saturn through the signs is, I think one of the most important things about Saturn is that it really marks and rules maturity and really kind of coming into the greater part of yourself. So Saturn doesn't truly unlock until your Saturn return, which we'll speak on later, as well as retrogrades. But you want to think that for anyone who is born, for anyone who is watching this webinar that isn't like 30, Saturn is going to make life very difficult for you before you're 30. I mean, Saturn can bring difficulty even after 30, but things are usually going to be hard because Saturn transiting the first part of your chart before it returns is teaching you the lessons of how to use your power before you finally have your return, and then you do so. So we'll talk about that later on in this webinar. That being said, Saturn in Aries is a very tricky position this is a spirit tester that also represents very powerful karma. One really great thing about Saturn and Aries is it can lend to instant manifestation, but on a negative, it can make really impatient people. And Saturn and Aries, being that Saturn also represents one's work ethic, Saturn and Aries could really bring or attract impatience from people who they report to, as there's a quick aptitude to this individual and a very, very selfish ambition. However, the toughness that this sign exudes could add inconsiderable stress. Saturn in Aries does build up huge amounts of, personal confidence in a person. And usually this is through years of like, you know, being incredibly harsh on oneself. So make sure, the Saturn and Aries trap is being way too hard on yourself and egoing your own evolution. So you really want to balance how much you take that yourself seriously, because Saturn and Aries could take themselves way too seriously. But at its best, this powerful karma helps judge the identities of others, so that it really makes one very passionate about standing forth in integrity. Saturn and Taurus, I feel, is definitely a lot more, I don't want to say cool, but it definitely offers much needed stability. However, Saturn and Taurus also does influence at a profound level um a lot of time that has to be taken. In fact, in the tarot, you know, Saturn in Taurus is the Seven of Pentacles, the very card of patience. So it really does help promise wealth gained over time, as Taurus is very much so willing to put in the work to gain a very important facet of wealth through very grounded values established. Although there could be a very powerful judgmental quality to this energy if the values developed are not in integrity. There's a strength to Saturn and Taurus that really allows it to have natives of this produce golden quality that definitely speaks for itself and lasts. When you think of Saturn and Taurus, you want to think lasting quality. And Saturn and Taurus represents the judgment of value, to where you really come into what is truly quality and what is, truly not. So, as we shift to Saturn and Gemini, I really like to think of Saturn and Gemini as the the legislative branch of the zodiac, which really gives a a very powerful and important level of understanding when it comes to the laws that could be made. Saturn and Gemini could have a very difficult mental anxiety, as there is a profound judgment of the minds of others. to where, similar to Mars in Gemini, there is a very, very harsh um, reaction to lies, or once again, anything that's just not in integrity, especially, in terms of things said. But uh, one of the magical elements of this karma is things that these people say are law, in a very flexible sense that doesn't always have to be formal. And this comes with the integrity of word and speech that Saturn really demands the natives. Things can get really tricky here now once we move to Saturn in Cancer. Saturn in Cancer is going to incorporate um, a very, very important need for integrity of sincere feelings. So people with Saturn in Capricorn can come across as really rude because Saturn is going to make them not only very honest about how they feel, but it's like if they were these people, it's going to be hard for these people to do that whole like fake love thing because that's disgusting to them. It's not in a Gemini sense where they have to tell the truth. It just could really give the one a more pessimistic outlook on empathy because they're tapping into a more realistic sense of how feelings are expressed and felt. Regardless, this is still a very powerful Saturn position, and it could really make for a powerful psychic because the energy projected, especially sexually, is definitely very powerful, giving one an intensely powerful will. However, there has to be great responsibility with the emotions projected, or it can come back in catastrophic ways. Saturn in Leo is now going to be a judge of the heart. And there is a very strong quality of vigor and charisma and courage that Saturn teaches to this individual through going through very tough and difficult times where all they have is their heart. So there's going to be a more realistic sense as to how practically one can show that they really are, you know, full of love and not just full of shit. Saturn and Leo, uh, being another spirit tester, going through fixed karma, will usually experience this in relationships to where they can't just necessarily flex their charm any which way. There's a serious regal air to how they express their heart because of the demand that is brought forth from such. This is actually a really strong Leo position. There can only be clashes if, one's heart is not mature enough to handle the complex rigors that this karmic lord brings. Saturn in Virgo is hella savage, OCD. Like, it has to be 100% fact, or you could miss me with the BS. Now, this is kind of really cool. Some of the best magicians and spiritualists will have Saturn in Virgo because they can quantify and analyze and make sure 100% that the experience they're experiencing is truly magical. As Saturn in Virgo really makes hypercritical the awareness and almost not need, but karma that comes forth from one's behavioral decisions. If anything, this is going to bring a great and strong career in anything empirical or scientific. But Saturn and Virgo really does make one hyper focused on the real details that govern the timing and system that makes up this matrix reality. And on top of that, there's also a magical level of material manifestation that occurs with the blending of one's imagination towards any realistic avenues they make to materialize one's intent. But it's so subtle that if you're not aware it's happening because of the karma, you could almost you could fall into certain loops until you really realize how much of your own behavior implements the karma being received. Now, as Saturn shifts into the more complex zodiac signs, Saturn and oops, forgot to put the right picture there. So let me do that real quick because my OCD will not allow me. I have OCD, but yeah, BRB. Oops. But I will speak a little bit. Saturn in Libra is going to incorporate more very, very, very complex themes in relationships where it's really just not necessarily it's not as easy to just relate with everyone because there's going to be such a strong intensity of focus in the parts of people that bring lots of pain in some aspects. And what makes this such a very interesting um Saturn position has actually more to do with the willingness, and not really so much willingness, but the judgment of character that really speaks of how you have to watch out what you do to these natives. Saturn in Virgo is going to be a judge of behavior, but Saturn in Libra, um, as they say, gets its exaltation here. And what lends to that is this kind of gives one an element of instant karma. And it's not so much instant as much as whatever whatever karma is received by Saturn and Libra, they're able to do it back. And not in a tit for tat kind of way, but in a way that stands up for one's justice. Saturn in Libra is where justice is served, as it's also 10th house of Capricorn. And even though it has all this egalitarian, just themes, it's very difficult because it's going to hold everyone that you relate with to a standard of integrity that in an ideal society would be grand, but really just ends up catching many people off guard. I suppose that's good for some people, though. This will really make serious one's level of focus towards the other and bring one karmic lessons through the relationships that they invest in. Saturn in Scorpio is going to incorporate very deep, complex motivations that strike profoundly, intimately into one's desire. This is really much so a judge of pure intent. So Saturn and Scorpio will really tax hard on the native to make sure that whatever they desire, it's aligned with their ambition. So they take intimacy incredibly serious, although this can make it very difficult to gain trust because there's such a high level of standard to how seriously they take this deep level of experience. And if there cannot be any trust derived, they can be very much so blocked. However, Saturn and Scorpio can give one a will that's almost unbreakable just due to the pure intensity of how well they can focus on what they want to succeed and achieve. Saturn in Sagittarius is going to now be a judge of beliefs. And the highly magical quality of this is every bit and parcel of how seriously you can take this charisma and passion to crystallize and materialize one's intent and passion to go on a literal adventure and discover meaning while also examining false belief structures and dismantling them. Due to this magical karma element, it can really put a lot in the air, however, and only make one focus on that which is paramount so that any belief structures within one that lacks integrity get changed through such a transit or natally. Saturn in Sagittarius, however, is quite misunderstood because there's so much more that happens in the astral realm than in this real dimension. It's such a um, magical energy that there's a seriousness to one's beliefs that could surprise other people who don't necessarily take it as serious as them. This seriousness over time will lend into powerful manifestation abilities, but it's less about manifestation for them and more about freedom. Saturn in Sagittarius wants you to get your responsibilities out the way and taken care of first so that you can have as much freedom as you can. Then you have Saturn in Capricorn. Saturn in Capricorn indicates greatness at its peak, and there's an elite nature to this energy that brings as much power as it does responsibility. Um, there's going to be a very huge level of ambition in any Saturn sign, but there is definitely a lot in Capricorn. And the karmic power is at its greatest here. But it really does speak more of how much responsibility is needed as one climbs up higher to that mountain. Saturn and Capricorn brings an absolute prioritization of integrity because this is where it gets its power, to where if that integrity is distorted, one can lose it all, since that is a main foundation in a certain sense. It's also going to speak of how much work one can handle. You'll find as Saturn is in these final signs, there's a lot of pressure that can definitely, be taken on. And karma is definitely in a huge way restrictive so that you don't make light of very serious decisions that need to be made. Saturn in Aquarius now is going to incorporate a powerful and profound level of knowledge as it becomes a cosmic judge of knowledge. And Saturn in Aquarius, although can bring heavy social anxiety in the first 30 years of life, it makes one's mind super strong and allows them to really discern between what knowledge is useful and what knowledge is just like literally trash. So it grants one strong telepathic ability and even some channeling in some senses. However, it also will make one serious about connecting others and gives people careers in anything humanitarian, which could even be like a bank teller. It doesn't have to be like anything weird. You could be a bank teller who you're the reason why people have a club to meet after the bank, or it doesn't have to be a club, but you provide a greater network of knowledge that allows people to stay integrated and connected. And then, of course, Saturn in Pisces is going to be pretty tricky to deal with because you're dissolving the need for karma and responsibility. And some people could feel like they don't really know what it is they're even meant to do, and they can lose their sense of karma. This doesn't usually come until their Saturn return, when they realize and accept that there's nothing that they have to do. They didn't come. Some people with Saturn and Pisces don't come into this life with karma, and usually Saturn and Pisces is meant to judge one's spirituality and unconscious behavior. So it speaks profoundly more to one's willingness to devote themselves towards spiritual crafts or towards people who are less fortunate. However, the magical aspect of this gives these people great discernment when it comes to dealing with invisible, unseen energies. And in some cases can materially manifest corporeal forms of that which is unseen. This could be a very difficult position, but it's one of the most miraculous, just because Pisces is involved. So we're going to take a short 10-minute break, get some popcorn. I'm just joking. Make sure you get your notes because we're going to go into the houses. But before we kind of after we kind of do any of that, we're going to write the contract with Saturn before the Q&A. If any of you have questions, we will do a Q&A at the end. And yeah, how has the Saturn information been so far? What's your favorite thing you've learned about Saturn so far? So before we get into the initiation and during this break, really start to think about what it is you want to accomplish. What do you want to accomplish? And what is it that, what does success mean to you? This is going to activate your sense of ambition. So just kind of meditate on this for the next 10, 15 minutes. We'll probably be back before then, but yeah, charge your energy and tune into Saturn. All right. Thank you very much for your patience. Let us get back to this Saturn webinar. And in this Saturn webinar, we're going to now take into account more so the houses that Saturn traverse. And one thing to keep in mind when it comes to Saturn's transit through the houses, there's a really great level of awareness through transits and natally that you'll see as Saturn really completes more the progression of one's identity, especially seen perfectly through the first house. Um, Saturn, especially close to the AC, makes one a karmic instrument. And it could really make serious one's identity, but it really allows you more or less to come into the profound awareness of how strong your identity must be to reflect back the karma that you're stepping into with this energy as well. Once again though, however, there's a really powerful sense of karma that not only gets reflected but experienced quite powerfully so. And this placement makes one very much so a judge of personality, where they can very discerningly see into how much strength someone's character and personality is and has. Keep this in mind because you'll find that in the case of the angular houses, there's a stronger level and element of personal energy that you're having to take in, and wherever Saturn is around, it adds so much challenge. So Saturn in the first will make you identify with all this karmic challenge, especially during transits, where you now have to make very serious and bring into great karma the decisions you make for who you are. So it could be very difficult to deal with the first 30 years, but what it gives you is a serious identity and power and strength of who you are that most people may never develop. Saturn in the second is definitely more grounded, and it will indicate the quality possessions that one could manifest because they become such a great judge of value. However, there's a very critical hit to one's self-esteem because the ambition that is noted will now apply itself. The ambition that is noted will now apply itself towards kind of being uh the best or having the most, not the most stuff, but the most quality. Saturn is like is definitely quality over quantity, but it's gonna really be suited into really having a rock hard self-esteem. Like at its best, you can have such a strong belief in yourself. Well, belief is more Jupiter, but just a strong confidence that nothing shakes you. But this could one can also be very hard on themselves during a transit like this, which will build so much value because you're putting in a lot of work to build and produce. Saturn in the third house now grants one a very stern attitude. And it's during a transit like this that could be incredibly mentally taxing because now every thought that you have has to be held with the integrity of who you are. And any such skills that one has now start being made more seriously into a craft so that it could be used to maybe make money with or barter or add in a serious way to it in this sense. Saturn is the influence that will make this serious. This does not necessarily mean that you or the person that has it will be serious. So squares to this, which we'll speak on in aspects, will really give an awareness of how aligned you are with this energy. Because even though Saturn can sometimes be harsh and really not hit home on what you need to understand as opposed to just giving you the lessons. It will make one a judge of language to where there's a critical need to use the right syntax and really analyze people by how they speak. Saturn in a fourth is pretty tricky because there's a bit of karmic ancestry gained from one's family. Usually this is manifested in protection, but it could be you could find that there's a lot of difficulty from members in your family who literally directly give you challenges during transits or block you from achieving your career success, sometimes out of protection, sometimes out of a difference of opinion or a difference in ambition. Although when really mastered, it could speak to having such a great support in one's family line. It's actually going to strengthen the power after Saturn return that one gains from their ancestors, because they'll be able to have the power of their soul in that sense, and then can judge one's soul by Saturn in the fourth can tell how easily one can break or not because of their internal world, but it could be very difficult to have that because on the inside your private life could be filled with so much. It's your private life that's filled with so much challenges that you have to deal with, where your private life is where you're supposed to like relax. The real estate aspect of this though speaks more to being able to establish foundation because of the karma put in to doing so. But Yeah, it's one of the more challenging house positions. Saturn in the fifth with the right attitude is really cool because it's going to really speak of legitimizing one's talents. As such, during a Saturn in the fifth transit, this will really start to help you understand what you really love and that you're willing to make a routine out of so that you could do things with your talents. The karmic love aspect of Saturn in the fifth makes you a judge of the heart, or makes one a judge of the heart, so that one's expression of their courage and passion is done so with integrity. It seemingly at first can suck the fun away from things, but you just want to think of it as necessary parameters to make sure everyone's aligned, and sometimes safe. I kind of see Saturn in the fifth as like you go to the club and now there's long lines because like everyone has to go through the metal detector. And yeah, it could kind of slow down the fun, but hey, no one has guns in the club. So that's one such analogy, if anything, and it develops very serious creativity within someone. This is where Saturn in the fifth will really develop the ambition to develop one's talents, but it could be very hard for dating because there's a no nonsense approach to dating with Saturn in the fifth that doesn't allow for that lighthearted fun that the fifth house needs, you know. But I mean, it's definitely not bad because sometimes it helps out. Anyway, Saturn in the sixth house grants one the development of exclusive techniques. The majority of one's karmic lessons are going to be surrounded by a great prioritization of committing to a routine. One's lifestyle is paramount and the most serious part of their life because, once again, every bit and parcel of what they make a part of their behavior will be met with a karmic lesson. And the sixth house is ruthless in that, you know, since this is the house that puts everything and integrates everything together, if your behavior is whack, Saturn will screw up your entire life. But if your behavior is perfect, then your lifestyle will be the greatest. Although it gives one a serious behavior, it makes one a judge of behaviors and lifestyles of people. And it usually Saturn and the sixth house people usually have some level of discipline. Although during transits, it's going to the it's going to crack the whip and show you where you need to be serious about certain health concerns or working out or routines. Saturn in the seventh house will bring with it karmic unions and serious partnerships, making one a judge of relationships. It's really kind of difficult though, because it's like it's a little bit like Saturn in the fifth because honestly, if you want like a shortcut to understanding Saturn in the seventh, it's like try being on a date or try being in a relationship with just a cock blocker with you in every way. So it's like you can't even get in a relationship because then Saturn is just like telling you everything that's like not in integrity with the partnership that you have, which is ultimately good because it's going to keep you away from any relationship that would ultimately waste your time. Although sometimes Saturn is just, making super serious that which, once again, is really supposed to be light in some senses. However, once again, it does bring in serious partnerships. Saturn in the seventh house is not an indicator of fidelity. I think some people feel like if Saturn is in the seventh house of one's chart or in synastry, it means that, oh, they like partnerships to be serious, so they'll be faithful. Fidelity is more Venus and Juno. Saturn in someone's seventh is their partnerships are binding. So it's relationships where they come into karmic lessons and it could actually be a source of pain for them. So Saturn in the eighth house is intensely difficult because this is really bringing hidden karma that has much to do with power struggles and the abuse of power, really stemming from an abuse of trust. This hidden karma is also going to incorporate Saturn's ability in this house to deal heavily with other people's resources. As a Gemini, Saturn is in the eighth house of my chart, even though it's in my ninth house. Um, I used to I used to work with patient information and enter codes, which involved me working with other people's resources, even down to being in other jobs, working with their money directly because I was handling their cash. So Saturn in the eighth really puts you in the position to where you handle other people's things, managing it as well in whatever context. Although it could also indicate, in the same sense, self-employment because you're taking other people's money to fulfill services or to send product. So the power struggles come from the boundaries that Saturn defines, and people with Saturn in the eighth can build powerful walls that make it very difficult for people to come in because there's a powerful level of trust here. And this is what makes people able to control their desire and sexual energy to where they can go years without sex. Like, it is what it is. Not to say they won't want to release it, but to get through those Saturnian walls could be near difficult if there's no trust developed over time. And thus, this makes Saturn a judge of secrets because they can sense the purity of certain things that are being hidden. Saturn in the ninth house is going to make one a very fervent preacher. Though it's Jupiter in the ninth house is more evangelical. Like, you gotta believe. Saturn in the ninth house is definitely more like stern and serious. And it represents much so the integrity of beliefs. It is the power of belief, and it can grant one a peak divine experience. But I feel like divine experience isn't the right word, as much as a peak manifestation of experience, taking one's ambition and really understanding the light of it all. The light meaning the awareness and the achievement of what you are ready to gain, similar to the 10th house. um this makes one a judge of philosophy, because the karmic challenges that one will go through is in the beliefs that one adopts, especially in the case of the father. Because the ninth house is higher education, people with Saturn in the ninth may also not graduate from college until their late 20s or their early 30s, which is ideal. There's a mystery to the timing here. And you'll also find that the relationship with one's father doesn't really kick off until the Saturn return. So, a couple fun facts there. Saturn in the 10th house is going to develop one's karmic legacy, especially during a transit that incorporates the fulfillment and establishment of one's career goals. Saturn in the 10th will give either a huge ambition to succeed and rise to the top, or a huge fear of such if they can't step up to their greatness. Because with Saturn in the 10th could come insane expectation, especially if someone in their family has a grand position of power or attains success that their family feels they must live up to, or they themselves. One thing about Saturn in the 10th that I think is cool is it does grant one the ability to either make or gain very exclusive positions of power where they're at the top of the public light. It also does make one have to be really responsible of their public image, because they'll have this very Saturnian or stern uh, outlook. Well, not outlook, but it's interesting. Saturn in the 10th people are going to have this reputation of being super serious, and they could be some of the kindest, most fun people ever, but just because they have Saturn in the 10th, the way that they come off in the public life, it could be really intimidating, because that's where, and it's interesting, the majority of their karmic lessons comes from authority figures or the paternal influence, where they have to deal with power dynamics as well. um, but in some cases can gain great lessons through such. They are the great judges of integrity that will be able to see how far one can get in life based on their character. Saturn in the 11th house is the organizational manager that has to work through their karma through other people and their friends. This is the Saturn position that will allow one to plan meetings and parties, but really seriously, develop organization within a community of people at its greatest. Although personally, Saturn in the 11th may have a small circle, especially during transits. When Saturn's in the 11th house, oh my goodness, if you had a lot of friends, not anymore. You'll probably lose almost all your friends, especially if Pluto's there, because it's only going to keep friends who are really there for you. and are like actually elite and not mediocre friends in your life. People who actually, you know, share your ambitions. But the karmic lessons and challenges here would have much to do with living up to those expectations and defining them in ways that are not limiting to you, because Saturn can represent limits in the worst ways, but also in ways that don't let you go out of control. This it will make one a judge of networks. Saturn in the 11th is the Saturn position that said, show me your 5 friends and I'll show you who you are. And finally, Saturn in the 12th house. I'm not going to lie. I think this is one of the most difficult Saturn positions ever. It can make one a supernatural magic master, but you either got it or you don't. And especially because it it's predating in a transit the first house, this could really break someone because it's different natally, but it could really create unconscious blockages. And we are talking about unconscious karma here, to where you may not even know how to deal with some of the karmic lessons that come, because they come from places that undo you. And this could really happen in ways that are really strange. Saturn in the 12th house people as well have to deal with the haunting reality of government corruption and how they may be misunderstood with what they are revealed, especially when it comes to any enemies in your field of career. They're going to be hidden in the way they move and maneuver, to where they might try and be your clients just to spy on you. Saturn the 12th is hella shisty, although it will give one careers as maybe like this is the one that's going to build an orphanage, right? To organize uh, uh, addiction clinics, but it could also lend and aid in money laundering. It's pretty nice for that. But it will make one a judge of spirituality. And this judge of spirituality is all encompassing. It's not like they'll look at your spiritual life, but it's going to judge the essence of your lifestyle. And during a transit like this, it can make one incredibly lethargic. Saturn the 12th sucks though, because you could really lose motivation and ambition. Saturn's all about ambition. So you just kind of, it could be, unless your ambition is for certain spiritual themes or just, that which does you, it could be really challenging. But usually Saturn and the 12 people have unique, strange ass setups to where, once again, kind of makes them like a supernatural magic master. So, as we get into the aspects of Saturn, I just want to check up on y'all. How was the Saturn through the houses? What was your favorite house interpretation? As we move forward, karmic timing is going to represent the aspects that Saturn represents during important transits or in synastry. Whenever you want to know what is going on in your life, you have to look at the sun. Um, if you want to know how you personally feel, about what's going on in your life, then look at your moon. You know, looking at certain planets like Venus and Mars will more indicate the sexual energy that's in motion and play, and how we're evolving that. But by far, if we're going to examine when certain things are going to happen, when am I going to get this promotion? When am I going to get this relationship? When am I going to break through or break free? You have to look at Saturn. And Saturn is the lord of karma that not only times lessons, but shifts time with it. Certain cases, certain things don't progress forward because you have yet to complete a karmic lesson. And these karmic lessons will be profoundly timed through Saturn transits. So, personal planets, transiting personal planets that transit Saturn, we'll talk about this in a collective conscious sense. And transiting personal planets on one's natal Saturn will speak to how this collective energy comes to manifestation on a personal level. Transiting Saturn now on personal planets can do the same thing, but will really speak more of karmic lessons and the cycles as such. So pay attention to those Saturn squares, as we'll see. Shared karma comes from the synastry and composite aspects that personal planets make with another person's Saturn and vice versa. You'll find the most long-lasting relationships have heavy Saturn contact. And the heavy Saturn contacts bring the most karmic challenge in relationships. But it's like the more challenging, it's like the long-lasting relationships could be the most challenging. So it brings success as well, but the restriction and limitation will only apply if, once again, there's karma that needs to be worked through in the form of habits changing or work being done. Oh, wow. So, as such, to illustrate the theme of maturation that Saturn really brings, as well as how this deals with karmic power, Saturn returns indicate the return of Saturn to its natural position in the zodiac chart. This happens, of course, every 28 years. 28 to 30 years, because a Saturn return is not necessarily when Saturn returns to the exact degree. A Saturn return is Saturn returning to the exact sign, or to the sign that your Saturn is in. So the whole entire Saturn transit is your Saturn return. When you run a Saturn return chart, you're going to look at Saturn returning to the exact degree, especially if it retrogrades. You want to wait until that last retrograde and then it goes direct again. Even if it's direct retrograde in your chart, once it reaches that degree and place, that's where you run your Saturn return chart. But the actual Saturn return is the entire 2.5 year to 3 year transit that Saturn transits as it returns back into your sign. Saturn return instills cycles with 4 different checkpoints as every 14 years you kind of complete this cycle and then come back around, just like every cycle, just with varying lengths. The first Saturn return is the Saturn return that really pushes you into adulthood, and you finally, get to enjoy. It's not enjoyable for everyone, but you finally gain that freedom that comes with being a responsible adult. Or you screwed up the first 30 years of your life, and now you have to spend the next 30 plus years, like, learning. Well, you don't learn anymore, you just kind of have to deal with it. That's usually kind of what happens. So for some people, so Saturn returns is you getting a return on your karma, the karma that you've done for the first 30 years of your life. But it's less than the first 30 years of your life. Saturn around the first time is uncovering and giving you the power of your energy, so that as you go through the second one, you return with your sense of direction and ambition. And so for the next 28 or so years, you build that, you literally build that. And for those people who work really hard that first 30 years, they have great success that they can work for the next 30 years, or, whether that's early retirement or, the next level of empire building or greatness. And once you finish that second Saturn return and you've worked through the kinks and evolution of your power, you come through to that great and final work, that third Saturn return that fully establishes the work that you've done over the first 2 cycles, and really delivers that magnum opus. So that's a picture of the sun. No diggity. And when we speak of Saturn and the sun, we speak of karmic awareness. What is the awareness of the karma in your life? In the case of the 12th house Saturn, where someone has a first house sun, they may not even be aware of their own karmic decisions. And that could be one of the most difficult positions to go through, in a way that's just kind of frustrating. But regardless, Saturn contacts to the sun could be power struggling at first, but it could establish a lot of strength and power within somebody, especially in the case of the natal conjunction, which literally gives someone power over time and perfects the nature of how like incredibly one can manifest from their heart and literally materialize anything that they want. And though it does add to their realistic nature, it does make real what they intend. Although the influence of Saturn will add so much challenge to what they're aware of, that life is kind of harder for these people. But they have so much ambition that they kind of invite that. In the case of the square, though, this is going to speak of very profound challenge from other people, to where the greater they walk in integrity, the more they can deal with that karmic challenge. But it could just be really hard. The Saturn squares just suck. to be honest, if you don't necessarily understand where it's coming from. Because Saturn squares could also bring one to power, but it just depends on the mythology used. Whereas oppositions can bring into completion, but it will require integrity on both parts. Saturn in the moon now is going to indicate emotional maturity. But ultimately, it could be very stressful because the moon, which really, um, values comfort, is almost drained of that um, with the strict Saturnian influence. There's going to be a more hidden and subtle emotional influence that makes serious one's feelings so that they can gain a more realistic understanding. In the case of the trine and sextile, for both the sun and moon, one's awareness and receptivity can align with their ambition and goals so that they don't get in the way of each other as featured in the square in opposition. Sometimes you just don't feel like doing what the hell you have to do. And you could look to squares in transits or natally to get in the way of that. If your moon squares someone's Saturn, or is conjuncted, that you could feel challenged by the nature of work that your partner has or you're having to experience personally. If you throw Mercury in the mix, we're now dealing with a sense of mental power that will add stress or focus depending on how Mercury is aspected. Mercury is able to account for a lot of information and communicate it fast. So the serious influence of Saturn will strengthen or make more serious the quality of information being processed to where it's still relevant, but it's more important. Although in some cases, like the square, it could be highly stressful on in a mental sense because Saturn squares and oppositions bring with it strict, critical doubt so that the ideas Mercury brings has to fit to a certain standard. And Saturn is going to be way more powerful than Mercury. But in very positive aspects like trines and sextiles, it strengthens the mental focus that the mind already aligns to so that one can achieve their ambitions and they're not as easily distracted. In terms of Venus now, Venus is going to add her touch and grace to the beauty one can gain from following their ambitions. A lot of serious models have like Venus Saturn contacts. Well, not serious models, successful models you'll find have like serious like Saturn Venus because they take it seriously and it's not just like a hobby. But what this does is it can make one so serious about relationships that they don't necessarily get in any until their Saturn return. Or Venus contacts to Saturn will make people kind of date older people. They usually don't get married till later in life though, because of the delay. And a lot of this delay comes to uh karmic challenges getting in the way of relating in affectionate ways, where especially in the case of the conjunction, they could have a majority of their challenges through relationships, and it can cause them to not necessarily value it in that general sense, traditional romantic sense. But I mean, positive context once again will speak to very stable relationships. This is where you might see fidelity. Uh, um, Venus people are usually going to be very loyal, even in the case of the opposition. Square, not so much. It won't speak to infidelity. It would just speak to a lot of, you know, rejection and unrequited love in some cases. Mars and Saturn is now going to speak to the integrity of one's intent that could be had based on how serious one is about their actions. It even adds this serious touch of energy to sex, where Saturn will guide along the ambition of one's intent so that they can not only be passionate about what they want to do, but also gain the power and strength needed to have a serious energy. A lot of people who are seductive or they they have, I don't want to say sexual charisma, but they're not bad with sex, usually have sextiles or maybe even conjunctions. The conjunction is really stressful on Mars, but it makes one very powerful with what they do. The square could be really difficult because it's like everything that you try to do, you feel you feel a challenge with, where a certain part of yourself gets in your own way of what you want to do, only to test the integrity of if you really want to do what you're trying to do. Whereas in the case of the opposition, it could bring into completion more powerful actions than in the case of the conjunction. When we now look at Saturn and the outer planets, Saturn and Jupiter will really speak to how real one could take their beliefs, so that this expanding influence and contracting influence take into account one's limits and balance them with their sense of adventure. Saturn and Uranus will have more to do with the boundaries one crosses, as Saturn represents the system and Uranus is like the busting of that system. Although it doesn't always have to be the busting of such, which could be innovation. But Saturn and Uranus, depending on how they're aspected, will determine whether one's ambitions and structure is being aided by innovative ideas, or they're clashing so that outdated ideas can be innovated in unconventional ways. Harsh aspects between Saturn and Uranus are really difficult because a lot that has been built can be destroyed, even in the case of Saturn, Pluto. Saturn and Neptune will really speak to a grounding and a manifestation of one's intent so that one's dreams can be made real. But you'll find in the case of squares, illusions and deception can get in the way of one's ambition and direction. Whereas in the case of sextiles and trines, these can align really well to where they're not illusions, but high divinely inspired experiences that add to one's level of creativity with the spirituality implied. Saturn and Neptune will add a responsibility to the engaging of these astral realms. Saturn and Pluto is really intense, but it actually speaks to a very deep crystallization through the pressure of both of pure power through intense challenge. Intense challenge. Saturn with the North Node will more or less indicate the weight of karma that one has to endure. The conjunction, of course, will make the career one has all aligned to their destiny. But if it squares the North Node, then they might have to deal with the things they're ambitious about distracting them from their destiny, or vice versa. But regardless, especially in the case of the opposition and conjunction, it adds so much responsibility to fulfilling one's karmic path that it could be the most challenging thing to really accomplish. But it comes with the greatest reward. So it is time for the Saturn initiation. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and I hope I did a good job of explaining what Saturn really is in the natal chart and in astrology and in life. So I invite you to get your notebooks out. If you still need some time, let me know. And over the next 5 to 10 minutes, we might not need 10 minutes, but we are going to create this grand karmic agreement between us and Saturn, or really you and Saturn. This Saturn initiation is going to incorporate the writing down of your goals and not really your wishes. You want to come to Neptune with your dreams, but you want to come to Saturn with a game plan. And not even a game plan, because it's not really a game to Saturn. You want to come to Saturn with you want to come to Saturn with an objective. You could totally use an online document. So definitely take some time to write over the next 3 years what you want to accomplish and achieve. Once again, you can write as much stuff as you want. You just want to write in any way you can. Um, you're basically writing to Saturn what you agree to accomplish during this Saturn and Capricorn transit. And if you commit to that every day of the transit, Saturn will surely promise you success. But of course, you have to commit to it. Praise him. But will you do it? We shall see. Yes, just like Cosmic Lullaby said, what do you want to accomplish and change? Less change, more accomplish. When you're done, sacrifice the blood of a goat, drain the blood, sacrifice the goat, drain the blood on the karmic agreement and sign it with your blood. No, I'm just joking. You could just sign it with your name and be prepared to work towards this. When Saturn goes into Capricorn, If you can, make sure you put the Saturn glyph um, symbol anywhere on the agreement. There we go. All right. Perfect. All right. I am now open for Q&A. Um, I'm definitely available to take any questions. Thank you once again for ordering this Saturn webinar. And stay tuned for part 2 where we break down Saturn and Capricorn. Any questions that you have, please, of course, keep to Saturn and any natal or transit questions, or even synastry if you have any. Ooh, yeah, you're right on the shadow period, dark versus light. So it's really going to speak of you finally taking action. All right, you feel like you're losing your mind because you're going to break out into a new way to act based off, not even act, but a new way to perceive a lot of your personal ambition, but more so the seriousness of this collective evolution. So just kind of flow with it until Saturn goes in a cap because it's going to be intense. With the Mercury retrograde, it's really speaking of reevaluating whether the goals you've developed so far apply to the new person you have become or the greater person you become. So, any such incongruencies, you just want to change your beliefs around. Great question. Saturn, 1 degree Gemini, it's going to really transform your whole working situation. It's really the tipping point you were waiting for because it's going to fully shift and move your capacity to directly manifest what you've built since it'll hit that King Kun's effect. Jody, a channeled message from Saturn really is similar to what I said before, but more to do with just you've already done the work. You have to let the work come to you. And in the case of Saturn retrogrades, which I didn't really mention, Saturn retrogrades in charts, they let the work come to you. You just really have to be in a position to process the karma. Progressed moon conjunct Saturn. I have progressed moon conjunct Saturn too. So it's really kind of ascending to a new level of soul power. Um as far as tips, just kind of take with a grain of salt the harshness of what you feel. It's really just meant to add strength in your soul. Saturn conjunct Venus and Mars is going to add serious creativity to where there's karmic challenges and a hidden melancholy, but it really adds a level of greatness to how serious one can take and add gravity to the same creative energy. Saturn in the third house will take the influence of all this extraordinary and like unique creative energy and ground it with the seriousness of mind so that you have a better understanding of how to realistically express this all. Saturn conjunct Venus and Mars will kind of take all the creativity of Venus and Mars, and it could really either add a restriction that person can feel intimidated by expressing that around the Saturn person, or it could just add the Saturn can organize it in certain senses. It depends on how the Saturn influence is expressed quite profoundly. Morgan, you won't be screwed if you don't allow people to take your power. That's really the worst I see. This first Saturn return will let you know how to perceive more or less how people respect you or lack respect of you. So just kind of embrace the challenge because this could actually open up a greater door of respect you gain. Saturn opposite Uranus works best the more you can balance structures you build with innovative ways to evolve them. Uranus demands evolution and Saturn demands structure. So if both of those can't be made, one is going to have to suffer. But if you can constantly be in a position to complete this, you're creating something long lasting that's just unique and innovative. Which over time, during some transits, you have to go through the stress and defeat so that you get rebuilt better. But yeah, really cool. Oh God. Wow. Well, Jupiter is currently transiting your Saturn in Scorpio. So I would say as a Libra, this just kind of adds very strong wisdom in how you express the knowledge you express. But I mean, with Jupiter transiting here, this is going to really add a certain ease of mastery over what you've spent doing and the talents that will be expressed similarly as well. Thankfully, with the moon trine, you have a keen receptivity to how it should feel, so it doesn't kind of strike you as odd. Anyway, I'm gonna end the Q&A here, and you could you don't have to do anything with this contract, but just commit to it. Saturn's really simple. You could sacrifice a goat or chicken if you want, but if you do the work, that'll do much better for you. Corny joke aside, y'all stay blessed. Tanya, the only advice that I have for you is more so or less, don't be so critical over your creative ideas, and just trust the wisdom of and integrity of how you may not compromise to certain uh ways of acting just for attention. But anyway, y'all stay blessed, and I really do hope you achieve the greatest amount of success with this initiation and commitment to Saturn. Peace.